So for today's video, I wanted to talk about one of the methods for opening up a freshly tied blank. And this is the method that I personally use, which is taking a blank before the wood has had a chance to kind of sit in the new form, and while the cane is still wet, and taking down the tip, taking off the ears, and opening it up immediately, and then letting it dry. So other reed makers do it differently. I will definitely give you the pros and cons of the method that I have chosen, but I will also do a video on letting the blank dry as a blank before opening it up. So hopefully you're coming to this video after watching the other video I made about blank tying. If you haven't and you have some questions about the blank tying process, at least how I do it, then make sure you go check out my reed tutorial video number 2, which is about blank tying. So for this tutorial, you're going to need a mandrel, a plaque, a freshly tied blank, still wet, a cutting block, a brand new razor blade, and any materials that you need to sharpen your knife. Beginning with this blank, I'm taking a brand new razor blade, and I'm going to, first of all, ensure that I have like the leftover right overlap and everything that I need. And then the way I do it is I flip the blank this way because I find it's easier for me to get right up against the profile of the reed and just take those ears off. So the reason why it's important that this is super sharp, like a brand new razor blade, is because you want it to be totally down the profile of the reed. So kind of starting back here, pushing forward, and taking off cane as you go. This is kind of like shaping if you think about it. Now I'm using the other side of the razor blade to get other side. And if you find that you get here, it's always better to leave a little extra ear than it is to take off a little bit too much and like do a divot in the cane. So if you get to this point and you feel like, I have a little bit extra ear, then you can always take a nail file and just go along the sides, make sure that you got the ears off the flesh. So now we're left with this, which is a closed blank, and the ears have been cut off. So next what I do, and this is, all in the same session, I get the tip of the tip really thin. This is something I didn't learn until a little bit too late, was when you're doing this, getting the bark off thing, you want to make sure that even though you're trying to get the tip of the tip extremely thin, you're trying to make sure that you don't cut through the tip. So, especially when you're going on these little sides here, the sides of the tip, it's really easy to kind of break through the top blade of the cane. You want to make sure you don't do that. So now that I've gotten the tip to be pretty thin, I'm going to get the bark off of the rest of it. So another thing that I just learned, I know it seems like I've learned everything late in life, but that's kind of the beauty of reed making, is that you're always learning. You're always adding more knowledge, remembering tips you've been given, using the scientific method with different strategies that you discover and have been taught, and finding the best system for you. So something that I was just told recently by kind of my mentor is that you want to make sure that you always have the reed sitting in a state of proportion with itself. So even though you aren't even close to playing the reed yet, you still want to make sure that you delineate the proper sections of it. So there should be a heart, there should be a back, there should be, all these in proportion with each other. So making sure that there is that concept of symmetry from blade to blade, from side of the blade to the other side of the blade, etc. And of course my knife is not sharp enough to get this burr off that you see that I'm struggling with here. But you just have to put the heart and back into proportion every time you're working. So I've kind of put in the tip being the thinnest part of the reed, and then putting in the back being a little bit thinner than the heart, but having a nice like slope into each section. So from here, I'm going to take my little wood block, dust it off a little bit, and then I'm going to take my razor blade And you can use the same razor blade you just used or a new one, whatever your preference. And you're going to get really up near the tip of the tip and just clip it off. Should come off easily if you have a sharp razor blade, and you also have a tip that's pretty thin. So notice that right away, and this is why I actually do this method. So this is kind of the pro of this method for me, is that right away I can see that I have sides of the tip that are touching. And this is kind of like a little tidbit that I'll definitely reiterate in some other like just talking reed lessons. But this is really important for being able to have any sort of stability in pitch for the upper octaves. It's really key that you have the sides of the tip touching, or at least very close. This will change a little bit because, as you can see here at the very tip of the tip, because of the way the blank was formed, it's kind of thicker at the very tip of the tip than it is lower down on the tip, so I'm going to get rid of that. And that's something I've referenced in the past in a different reed video, was the idea of clack, right? So that's what I'm going to get rid of before I let this blank sit open. So before I work on the tip, I always sharpen my knife, and by the time we get rid of that clack, this little space you see here, that little sliver of light, should be gone. So now that my knife is sharp, I am just going to work on the edge of the tip, getting that clack off that you can very obviously hear here. And the reason why I'm doing this is just because there's kind of the idea that you want to leave your reeds in the best shape possible so that when you come back to them, they have the best possible chance of being successful. So if you ever feel like, I'd feel like I could do a little bit more when you put your reeds away, or you leave them in a way that allows them to dry and get one of those really big football openings where the opening at the tip is really big. If you ever allow it to dry like that, odds are it's not going to want to come back or be easy to play. You probably won't be able to get that opening down to a manageable height. So, making sure that you're constantly leaving your reed in the best shape possible for when you come back to it. And your later self will thank you, because you won't have to do all of the steps of the process back over again because you've taken adequate care at each step to ensure your future success. So, that is why I am doing this, so that it will not dry with a ridiculously open opening, and so that finishing work will take less time when I start it up next time. And I'm for sure when I'm doing this method, I'm making sure that when I'm working on the very tip of the tip, I'm doing what I showed you in the first video, which is that kind of flat angle forward. But anytime I kind of go further down the tip, I'm making sure I'm only getting the sides and corners, because even from this early of a stage, you're kind of setting the tone for what this tip is going to look like when it takes official shape. So you want to make sure that you leave as much in the middle to work with as you possibly can. So just because you're just starting out, don't be careless. Make sure you are getting only the sides and corners of the tip. So at this point, I'm just going to get rid of these digs that I kind of put in the cane a little bit ago. And I was setting up the preliminary delineations between the sections of the reed and deepening the back a little bit for the same reason I gave you earlier. Just kind of looking for that symmetry. And you can look for it this way, or you turn it on the side of the reed and look at it that way in profile, or you can do it just by kind of doing a quick flip back and forth between sides, whatever you prefer. So now that I've got those digs a little bit more manageable, I'm going to check the suction one more time, and it seals. So now that I have diminished the space between the sides of the tip and gotten the tip pretty thin, I'm actually going to just let it sit and dry now, because I've done a lot of kind of manipulation to this cane and the wood needs some time to settle and get used to its new form. So I'm really not going to do anything else with this reed until it's completely dry, and then I'll start to finish. And you know, you might even be able to crow this right now. I'm not sure if I can or not. which is a good start. So as you can see, it crows actually, and it crows pretty vibrantly. That could just be because I'm at sea level and it's quicker and easier to get cane to vibrate at sea level. But yeah, I'm not gonna do any more work to it at the moment. The only thing that I would do right now would be to clip it. And this is all part of the things that you're going to learn, is knowing when to stop. Because there is such a thing as overworking some cane. There is such a thing as the cane will be different after it sits. So perhaps when I play this again, it won't be nearly as rattly. It'll kind of stiffen up a little bit. So give your cane the time that it needs to settle down and give you a more representative feel for what the cane is actually doing. So doing it all in the first session is a bad idea. That's why we kind of talk about those 3 different sessions where you begin finishing and then you let it sit and then you do a little bit more and you play on it for 5 minutes and then you let it sit and then eventually you'll do your final finishing touches before you play a practice session. So yes, that's all for today's video, and I will see you in the next one.